My name is Clara Sterling, and I am 36 years old. I live on a tree-lined street in a peaceful suburb just outside of Salt Lake City, and until recently, my life was defined by a quiet, predictable rhythm. That rhythm was shattered a week ago. My husband Richard is gone. It was a heart attack, they said. So sudden, so brutally final. The life I knew, or thought I knew, vanished in an instant, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence in our home. I've spent the last 5 years in this house, a place that now feels like a museum of a life that wasn't entirely mine. Our neighbors recognize me, offer polite waves from their driveways, but true connection was never really part of the equation. I used to find comfort in that predictability, in the silent agreement of mutual distance. I used to, until the silence became unbearable. Directly next door, in a modest brick house identical to mine, lives Leo Vance. He must be in his early 30s, with kind eyes and a reserved demeanor that I always found gentle. I think he works in tech or something similarly logical and steady. Over the years, our interactions have been limited to brief, pleasant greetings as he collected his mail or I watered my flowers. We never truly spoke. He seemed to exist in his own quiet orbit, just as I existed in mine, alongside Richard. Richard was older, well into his late 40s, a man who always seemed to be moving, always preoccupied with a destination that was never home. He was a whirlwind of energy that rarely settled. Leo, by contrast, had a stillness about him, a calm aura that you could feel even in a fleeting 10-second exchange. Last week, Richard died. The news traveled through the neighborhood like a current. Whispers carried on the afternoon breeze. I don't remember much about the funeral, just a sea of dark suits and murmured condolences that felt a world away. I didn't think it was my place to involve anyone, especially a neighbor I barely knew. But the day after we buried him, the day after the last casserole dish was returned, I found myself standing on my own porch, staring at his front door. It was late afternoon, around 4 o'clock. The house behind me was a hollow cavern of memories, each room echoing with a silence that screamed. I couldn't breathe. I knew he worked from home some days, and I could only hope this was one of them. I walked the few steps across the lawn, my heart pounding with a mixture of desperation and embarrassment. When he opened the door, he was in a comfortable hoodie and sweatpants, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to concern. I was standing there in a long black coat, my hair hastily pulled back, my eyes swollen and raw. I was clutching a small mug of tea that had long gone cold. "Hi, Leo," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but do you mind if I come in for just a minute?" He didn't hesitate for a second. "Of course," he said, stepping back to let me in. His home was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and books. He guided me to the couch and offered to make fresh tea, which I accepted numbly. I didn't want to explain myself, and he didn't press me for answers. I think he understood that some things don't need words. I sat there, my hands clasped in my lap, watching the steam curl up from the new, hot mug he placed in front of me. After what felt like an eternity of shared quiet, I finally found my voice. "It's too quiet next door," I whispered, the words feeling fragile in the air. "I thought I could manage it, but I don't want to be alone right now." He simply nodded, his eyes full of a deep, uncomplicated understanding. He told me I didn't need to explain anything. We just sat there, the space between us filled not with awkwardness, but with a strange and welcome sense of peace. After a long stretch of that comfortable silence, I began to talk. The words just started spilling out, quiet and measured at first, then with more conviction. I talked about Richard, about the beautiful beginning we'd had, and the slow, imperceptible erosion of our connection over the years. I spoke of how, in the end, We had become little more than courteous roommates, sharing a mortgage but not a life. I wasn't weeping. It felt less like grief and more like a final, overdue confession, a truth seeping out from a place I'd kept locked away for years. I looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "I know this must sound terrible, but a part of me feels like I've already mourned him. It feels like I lost the man I married long before his heart stopped beating." I didn't know what kind of response to expect, but he didn't offer empty platitudes or judgments. He just listened, his gaze steady and patient. That was all I needed. He just listened. Before I left, my eyes drifted around his living room, taking in the stacks of books and the comfortable, lived-in feel of the space. I gave him a faint smile. "It's warm in here," I said, and the simple statement held a world of meaning. Then I was gone, stepping back across the threshold into my own cold, empty house. But something had been irrevocably altered for both of us. The morning after my first visit to Leo's, I couldn't settle my mind. There were calls to make, endless paperwork to sort through, a life to dismantle piece by piece. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the image of me sitting on his couch, his quiet presence a steady anchor in my storm. The way he had listened, without interruption or expectation, had burrowed its way under my skin, not in an intrusive way, but as a lingering warmth. By noon, I realized I hadn't eaten. I was staring blankly at an insurance form when I heard a knock on my own door. My heart gave a strange little jump. I opened it, and there he was. No formal work clothes this time, just jeans, sneakers, and a soft gray t-shirt. In his hands, he held 2 brown paper bags from a local deli, the one a few blocks away with the good sandwiches. "I figured you might have forgotten to eat," he said, offering a small, hesitant smile. "I almost did. I thought I'd bring lunch if that's okay." He didn't wait for a formal reply, just took a small step forward as I moved aside, an unspoken invitation passing between us. It felt surprisingly natural, as if this was a simple continuation of yesterday's conversation. We ended up on my back patio. The sky was a heavy sheet of gray, but the air was crisp and cool against my skin. He handed me a turkey and Swiss, and we sat in my patio chairs, the crinkling of the sandwich wrappers the only sound between us for a long time. We ate in silence at first, and I was grateful that he didn't try to force conversation. I took small, mechanical bites, my gaze fixed on the dense line of pine trees bordering the backyard, my mind a million miles away. Eventually, I was the one who broke the quiet. "It's so strange," I said, my voice low and thick with unshed tears. "I thought I would be more devastated. I expected to wake up screaming or sobbing, but instead I just feel this profound emptiness, like I'm a ghost walking through someone else's life." I glanced over at him, but he was looking out at the trees, giving me the space to speak without the pressure of a direct gaze. "I've had this weight on my chest for so long, Leo, for years before Richard died. It's like the grieving process began when our marriage started to die, when we stopped being partners and just became 2 people sharing a roof." I let him talk, and he let me. He didn't interject with advice or try to relate it to some experience of his own. He just sat there, a silent witness to my unraveling. I sighed, a long, weary sound. We used to be so close. I loved him so much. But then his career took over everything. He traveled constantly, came home late, and when he was home, he was somewhere else. I started eating dinner by myself, even on the nights he was there. We slept in the same bed, but there was an ocean between us. I finally turned to face him, my eyes feeling glassy but my gaze firm. "Have you ever felt like you were slowly becoming invisible in your own house?" He met my eyes and nodded, not because he'd lived my exact experience, but because he understood the fundamental loneliness I was describing. "I think on some level, everyone does." A moment passed, and then a small, self-conscious laugh escaped me. I'm so sorry. I didn't intend to unload all of this on you. I don't have anyone else to talk to. You don't ever have to apologize, he said, his voice soft but firm. Sometimes you just need someone to sit with you in the quiet. I looked at him then, and my chest filled with a feeling I couldn't name. It was gratitude, but it was more than that. It was a profound sense of being seen. For the next hour, the conversation shifted. We didn't talk about Richard or grief anymore. We talked about small, simple things, terrible movies we both secretly loved, our favorite coffee shops in the city, and the time I adopted a stray cat that graciously stayed for a week before disappearing again. I told him about my work as a freelance graphic designer, and he told me a story about accidentally sending a company-wide email with a typo in the subject line that read, "Pubic announcement," instead of "public." I laughed. A real, unrestrained laugh that seemed to bubble up from a place deep inside me I thought had gone dormant. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt a flicker of joy. At one point, as we sat at the small patio table, the back of my hand brushed against his. It lingered there for a beat, a warm, solid pressure that sent a jolt through me. We both noticed it. I pulled my hand back gently, a wave of heat rising in my cheeks. A flicker of something. Guilt, maybe, or just sheer confusion, crossed my face. I should go, I said abruptly, standing from my chair. It's too soon. I don't want you to think I'm just using you as some kind of emotional crutch. He stood up as well. You're not, he said, and I knew he meant it. I hesitated at the back door. I just really didn't want to be alone today. He nodded. Then don't be. Anytime you need to talk, or just not talk, my door is open. A heavy silence settled between us, thick with unspoken feelings. Neither of us wanted to name what was happening, but we both felt it. A connection, a warmth, a closeness that had taken us both by surprise. I nodded slowly. Thank you, Leo. Really. Then I stepped back inside, closing the door behind me. I watched him walk across the lawn to his own house, his hands in his pockets. Something fundamental had changed between us. Nothing physical had happened beyond that fleeting touch, no embrace, no kiss. And yet, I knew an unspoken chapter had just begun, and it wasn't going away. The following day started quietly. It was a dreary, overcast morning, the air hanging heavy and damp with the promise of rain. I sat at my kitchen table, a lukewarm cup of coffee cradled in my hands, trying and failing to focus on a list of tasks. My mind was a carousel, circling back again and again to Leo. It wasn't just that he had brought me lunch yesterday. It was the feeling of being with him, the ease of his presence that lingered long after he was gone. I couldn't shake his words, or the way he looked at me with that gentle mix of empathy and quiet respect. And then, there was that moment, the brief brush of our hands on the patio table, a small thing that had imprinted itself on my memory like a brand. Sometime after my sad attempt at lunch, I found myself at the window overlooking our adjacent backyards. I told myself I wasn't looking for him, but my eyes scanned his property anyway. And there he was, standing near the edge of his own porch, his arms wrapped tightly around his chest as if holding himself together. He looked so small from a distance, so uncertain, like someone teetering on the edge of a decision they weren't sure they should make. 10 minutes passed, then 15, and then I heard the knock. Even before I turned to open my front door, I knew it would be him. He stood on my doorstep in a navy blue sweater that hung slightly off one shoulder and a pair of dark jeans. He looked tired, but his eyes held a quiet intensity, the look of someone who had been wrestling with their thoughts. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice soft. "Yeah," I breathed, stepping aside without a second thought. He walked past me and into the living room, just as I had done in his house 2 days before. But his movements were slower this time, more tentative, as if he were questioning his own right to be there. I didn't rush him. I just stood for a moment, watching him survey the room as if it might offer up some kind of answer he was looking for. "I wasn't planning on coming over," he said after a moment, his back still partially to me. "I've been going back and forth for the last hour, but I didn't really know where else to go." "You don't need a reason," I told him gently. He moved toward the couch and sat down, curling into the corner and drawing his legs up, as if he needed to feel small for a little while. I sat in the armchair across from him, leaving a safe distance between us. The house was quiet for a bit, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the steady ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall. "I don't know how to be alone," he confessed finally, his voice barely above a whisper, breaking the silence. "I went from my parents' house to a dorm with 3 roommates to living with my ex. There's always been someone else there. Now, it's just me." I nodded slowly, understanding the sentiment, even if the circumstances were different. "It's a difficult adjustment," he exhaled, a shaky breath. "The thing is, I felt alone for a long time, even before she left. It's like I was mourning the end of us long before she was even gone." His words were heavy, honest, and I could tell it cost him something to say them. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, trying to convey my support without words. "That kind of loneliness is the worst," I said. "It's a whole different kind of brutal when someone is physically present, but emotionally, they're a million miles away." He looked at me then, a direct, searching gaze. His voice dropped even lower. "Do you think it's wrong that I don't feel guilty being here? I don't feel guilty for talking to you like this, so soon after everything with you." I took a moment before I answered, wanting to choose my words carefully. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I don't think there's a prescribed timeline for grief or for connection. Sometimes people find their way into our lives exactly when we need them. That doesn't make it wrong." His eyes softened, and the tension in his shoulders seemed to release, as if he'd been holding his breath, waiting for my verdict. "I just didn't expect to feel drawn to someone right now," he whispered, looking down at his hands. "Neither did I." He began to fidget with the hem of his sleeve. "I don't want to go back there tonight. Not because I'm running from it, but because I can't sit alone in that quiet house again. I feel like I'm going to suffocate." I could see the raw truth of it in his eyes. This wasn't melodrama or an exaggeration. This was a man who had reached the absolute limit of what he could endure on his own. "You don't have to explain," I said quietly. "If you need a place to just breathe, you can stay here. I'll make up the guest room." He blinked rapidly, fighting back a sudden wave of emotion. "I didn't expect you to say that." "You're not alone in this, Leo." He nodded slowly, and for the first time since he'd arrived, a tiny, fragile smile touched his lips. Later, I pulled clean sheets from the linen closet and made up the bed in the spare room, while he sat in the living room, sipping the chamomile tea I'd prepared. We didn't talk much more. The silence had returned, but it felt natural now, like a comfortable blanket. Before he went to the guest room for the night, he came to find me in the kitchen. There was no drama, no hurried intensity, just a quiet, profound closeness. "Thank you, Clara," he said softly, "for this, for not asking too many questions, for making me feel like a person again." Then he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not in that moment. It was purely, deeply human. His head rested gently against my shoulder, and I held him with both my arms, offering a steady, calm embrace. It was the kind of hug you don't forget. When we finally separated, he whispered, "Good night." and then he disappeared down the hall into the guest room. I stood there for a long moment, alone in my quiet house, the warmth of his presence still clinging to me. And for the first time in a very long while, I realized something had irrevocably changed. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was afraid or because anything had happened. It hadn't, but because I was so acutely aware of him, aware that Leo was just down the hall, aware of the quiet burden he was carrying, and aware that this was no longer just about a kind neighbor offering a shoulder to cry on. This was a man who was hurting, who now, for reasons he might not even fully comprehend, had chosen to seek refuge in my home. The walls of my house felt thinner, every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified, and my thoughts refused to stop spinning. I kept replaying the hug in the kitchen. It wasn't born of passion or romance. It was born of a deep human need for comfort. It was honest. The kind of embrace you remember not for what it might lead to, but for how desperately it was needed by both of you. When the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the blinds, I finally slipped out of bed. The house was completely still. I moved quietly, not wanting to disturb him. I brewed a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, and stood by the window, wrapping my hands around the warm mug, watching the soft morning light creep over the backyard fence. About 20 minutes later, I heard the soft, cautious sound of his footsteps in the hall, as if he were worried he was intruding. He appeared in the doorway, wrapped in the light gray blanket from the guest room. His hair was tousled from sleep, his expression calm but tinged with weariness. He was still beautiful, but in a different way now. More vulnerable, more real. "Morning," he said quietly. "Hey," I replied with a small smile. "I made coffee." He nodded, entering the kitchen to accept the mug I offered. We stood there for a long moment in companionable silence, just sipping our coffee. There was something about the quiet between us. It was never awkward, only restful. Eventually, he sat down at the kitchen table, pulling the blanket more snugly around his shoulders. He stared out the window for a long time before finally saying, "I have no idea what I'm doing." I sat down across from him. "I don't think you're supposed to, Leo. I think you just figure it out 1 minute at a time. And right now, that's enough." He nodded slowly in acknowledgement. I keep thinking about how it felt yesterday, just sitting in here, talking, breathing. It felt like I got a tiny piece of myself back. Then he looked directly at me, his gaze holding something I couldn't quite decipher. Not romance, not confusion, just an incredible depth. My ex and I, we weren't really a couple anymore. We were just occupying the same space, sharing bills. It was a life on paper. I didn't even realize how hollowed out I'd become until I was completely alone in that house. I just listened. I didn't interrupt. I could tell he needed to give these thoughts a voice. "I came here yesterday because I couldn't stand the silence anymore," he continued. "And now, I don't want to go back. Not yet." He ended up staying the entire day. We didn't make a formal plan. He was just there. I made us scrambled eggs and toast for breakfast. He helped me sort a mountain of laundry, and he laughed when he discovered a single rogue pink sock that had somehow infiltrated my whites. At one point, we went for a walk around the neighborhood, a slow, meandering loop under the gray sky. We didn't hold hands, but our shoulders brushed against each other every now and then, a small, recurring point of contact that neither of us mentioned. The day unfolded with a gentle, unhurried rhythm. That evening, I made us a simple dinner of pasta and a fresh salad. Afterward, we found ourselves on the couch in the living room. He had his legs tucked beneath him, a mug of tea held in both hands. I sat beside him, our sides nearly touching. A nature documentary was playing on the television, but neither of us was really paying attention. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "It's strange. I feel a sense of peace here, like I'm allowed to just be. I haven't felt that in so long." I turned to face him. "You don't have to rush anything," I told him. "There's no script for this." He looked up at me then, his eyes searching mine for something. Permission, perhaps, or just understanding. "Do you think it's wrong that I don't feel bad about being here?" he asked, his voice vulnerable. "No," I said gently. "I think you're doing what you need to do. There's nothing wrong with that." His head tilted, coming to rest against my shoulder. I let him stay there. My arm instinctively found its way around him, not in a forceful or suggestive way, but just as a steadying presence. And then, in that quiet moment, something shifted. He looked up at me, our faces closer than they had ever been. His gaze lingered on my lips. I could feel the soft warmth of his breath, and then slowly, tentatively, he leaned in. His lips met mine, a touch so soft and careful it felt more like a question he wasn't sure he should be asking. We kissed just once. There were no fireworks, no sudden rush of passion. It was just a moment of pure connection. Two people trying to feel something that wasn't pain. He pulled back almost immediately. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You don't have to be," I replied, my own voice quiet. We didn't kiss again. He leaned back against me, this time resting his head against my chest, and we stayed that way for what felt like an hour, steeped in a quiet stillness. Something had changed, and though neither of us dared to say it out loud, we both knew. At the time, I don't think I fully grasped how deep the connection between us had grown. In the beginning, we were just two lonely people, figuring out how to live with the new, silent realities we'd been handed. As the days turned into weeks, something about the profound simplicity of our shared moments, the quiet morning coffees, the long, rambling conversations, the comfortable evenings together, began to feel like something more, something real and sustainable. It wasn't a sudden or dramatic transformation. It was a gradual unfolding. After that quiet night when he had stayed over and we shared that one hesitant kiss, we didn't rush into anything. In fact, after that night, a new, unspoken understanding settled between us. He went back to his own house, and I stayed in mine. We both needed time and space to process what had happened, to let the dust settle. But it wasn't an awkward retreat. It was a natural pause. Neither of us was ready to dive headfirst into something new. We both needed to move at our own pace. For the next few days, he stayed in his own home. He told me he wasn't ready to abandon it, and I understood completely. He needed to face the quiet, to clean out the closets, to sort through the memories that lingered in the very walls around him. But he came over every single day, sometimes just for a cup of coffee, sometimes for a long talk, always for a dose of comfort. His own grief was still present, a heavy weight on his heart, but a sense of quiet companionship was steadily growing between us, one that didn't require grand gestures or overwhelming confessions of feeling. I would have coffee brewing in the mornings, and we'd sit on my couch, sipping it in comfortable silence, sharing whatever thoughts had surfaced overnight. Sometimes he would cry, and I would just sit with him. Other times he would laugh at something ridiculous I did, like the time I spilled coffee all over the kitchen table, and my frantic attempt to clean it up with a paper towel only succeeded in spreading the mess even further. I found myself smiling more, too. Something about his presence was slowly, steadily bringing me back to life. And I could see that I was having the same effect on him. I could see the change in his eyes. They were no longer solely filled with sorrow. A new light was beginning to surface. He started to smile more, even if it was just a small twitch of his lips at first. His laughter, when it came, was more free, less hesitant. He started talking about things he had forgotten he enjoyed, things from before his world fell apart. I could see him finding himself again, one small piece at a time. It wasn't a fast or easy process, but with each moment, each day we spent together, I could see that he was healing. Not completely, grief doesn't work that way, but he was learning to live alongside it. As time went on, I realized that I was learning to do the same. Then, one Saturday, about a month after that first knock on my door, he invited me to his house for dinner. I hadn't set foot inside since the day of his initial visit, and I felt a knot of nerves tighten in my stomach as I walked across the lawn. His house, after all, was where it had all begun for him, the place he had lost so much, the place where his ex had once walked through the front door every evening. But he had invited me, and this time, it felt different. It felt like a deliberate step forward. I brought a bottle of wine. He cooked a simple meal, pasta with a light, flavorful sauce, something comforting and unpretentious. We ate outside on his back patio as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The evening air was cool and pleasant, the kind of night where you can just sit and appreciate the stillness of the world. We didn't talk excessively during dinner. We didn't have to. The conversation flowed easily, as if we had been sharing meals like this for years. There was no pressure, no hidden expectations, just the soft clinking of our forks against the plates, the quiet hum of the neighborhood settling down for the night, and the occasional shared glance when one of us said something that made the other smile. As the night deepened, the sky turned a dark velvet, and the soft glow from the patio string lights cast a gentle, warm light between us. That's when he looked at me, and his expression was different from any I had seen before. There was no sadness in his eyes anymore, no lingering uncertainty. There was something steady, something sure. "I think I'm ready," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Ready for what?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat, unsure of where this was heading. "Ready to let myself move forward. I've been stuck for so long, Clara, and I honestly didn't know how to get out of it. But when I'm with you, I feel like I can. Not because you're fixing me, but because you've helped me see that it's okay to move on, that I don't have to be defined by what I lost." His words hit me with a force I hadn't anticipated. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just reached across the small table and took his hand in mine. It felt right. It felt natural. I didn't need to say anything. He knew I understood. I knew too. He smiled then, a real, open-mouthed smile that reached his eyes, and I realized in that moment just how far he had come in such a short amount of time. This was no longer just about him getting over his past. This was about him finding something new, something unexpected, but something undeniably good. "I don't need to rush into anything," he continued, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. "But when I picture my future, you're in it, and that means something to me." It was my turn to smile, a warmth spreading through my chest mixed with a touch of my own nervousness. "I don't need to rush either," I said softly. "We can take it as slow as we need to. But I want to be there with you, Leo. I think we both deserve that." The silence that followed wasn't heavy or awkward. It was full of a shared, peaceful understanding. There were no more questions to ask, just a quiet certainty that whatever was coming next, we would face it together. From that night on, things were different. We didn't immediately fall into a passionate whirlwind romance. We didn't need to. We continued to take our time. We still had our quiet mornings together, and our long evenings spent talking or doing simple things around one of our houses. We savored the simplicity of our companionship, and as the days turned into weeks, we found ourselves leaning on each other more and more. We never rushed, but slowly, surely, we both came to realize that we had found something real, something true, something worth protecting. A few months later, after countless shared dinners and quiet nights, I found myself waking up next to him every morning. It wasn't the loud, chaotic, all-consuming love you read about in novels. It was the kind that felt steady and deep, like the roots of an old tree. It wasn't built on grand gestures, It was built on thousands of small, quiet moments of shared support and understanding. I was happy, truly happy, and so was he. And that's how I knew it was the right kind of ending, or rather the right kind of beginning. The kind where we both found a way to move forward, not by forgetting the past, but by refusing to let it define our future. And just like that, our story was no longer about grief. It was about healing. It was about second chances.